Have you ever wondered what fate awaits an empire when its ruler is not a seasoned general nor a wise senator, but a boy barely 14 years old, armed not with the sword of Rome, but with a mysterious black stone carried from the deserts of Syria? Could devotion to such a relic safeguard a crumbling empire, or would it turn the eternal city into nothing more than an altar of fear and blood? This haunting question hovers over the story of Elagabalus, the young emperor who would shake the Roman world to its core. The year was 218 AD, and the Roman Empire was restless, fractured by wars, conspiracies, and betrayals. From the heart of Syria, a boy emerged, not as a soldier, but as a high priest of a god few Romans had even heard of, Elagabalus, the sun deity of Emesa. His name was Varius Avitus Bassianus, but history remembers him only as Elagabalus, a name bound forever to scandal and dread. He was the son of Sextus Varius Marcellus and Julia Soaemius, but his true path was shaped less by parents and more by a woman whose ambition rivaled the gods themselves. His grandmother, Julia Marina, a matriarch who would not let her family's power slip away after the assassination of Caracalla. For Julia Marina, the boy was a vessel, young enough to be molded, yet cloaked in the aura of the sacred. By blood, he was tied to the Severan dynasty, but through religion, he was inseparable from the god he served. The temple of Emesa, with its incense, drums, and frenzied dances, was his childhood. The black meteorite, believed to embody the sun god Elagabalus, was his constant companion. In the chants of priests and the hands of worshippers, he was taught not only ritual, but destiny. And destiny, whispered through the corridors of his grandmother's schemes, was to sit upon the throne of the Caesars. The empire at this time was fragile. Macrinus, the man who had seized power after Caracalla's murder, was unpopular with both soldiers and elites. He lacked noble blood, and worse, he lacked the charisma of the Severan line. Julia Marina saw her chance. Rumors spread like fire. Elagabalus was not merely a distant relative, but the secret son of Caracalla himself. In a world where legitimacy often mattered more than truth, this whispered lie grew powerful enough to raise an army. Soldiers, longing for a new Severan emperor, turned their eyes to the boy priest in Syrian robes. What chance does a child have against the storms of empire? Perhaps none. And yet, with the hand of his grandmother guiding him, the boy was thrust forward. At 14, he was proclaimed emperor in the camps of the Eastern legions. Priests and generals alike hailed him as the chosen one, the living bridge between Rome and the sun god who ruled the heavens. It was not skill with the sword nor victories in the Senate that lifted him to power. It was myth, faith, and manipulation, forces far more volatile than steel. And thus the empire began to tremble, as a child of shadows, crowned with divine fire, marched slowly toward Rome. The rumor was a weapon sharper than any gladius. "He is Caracalla's son," the officers whispered, and the legions, hungry for the familiar thunder of the Severan name, leaned in to listen. Letters were carried at night, oaths were taken before campfires, standards dipped toward Emesa. A boy priest became a banner, and the banner gathered men. Macrinus, austere and unloved, tried to buy time with proclamations and pay, but loyalty can't be purchased once faith has chosen a new altar. Could a single lie, told with conviction, build an emperor, or was it already building the scaffold for his fall? The meeting came at Antioch, where dust and destiny mingled. The sun beat down upon helmets and shields, a merciless judge over both camps. Elagabalus did not win that day by stratagem. Others bled and planned for him. Yet when the field emptied and the crows began their patient circles, the Eastern army lifted the boy high. Trumpets sounded the name the West would soon learn to fear and mock in equal measure. With Macrinus routed, the long road to Rome unfolded like a prophecy fulfilled. The boy emperor's procession moved as a moving shrine, banners, priests, exotic musicians, and at its heart, the black stone from Emesa, swaddled and solemn, as if the very sun required escort. Rome, suspicious yet spellbound, held its breath as he entered. Senators watched with faces carved from granite. The people pressed close, searching for wonder or weakness or both. The city had seen conquerors and philosophers, tyrants and reformers. It had not, however, seen this. A crowned adolescent whose authority seemed to flow not from legions or law, but from a meteorite and a god with a foreign name. He climbed the Palatine like a celebrant mounting a temple's steps. Processions were arranged, altars renamed, schedules of triumph refitted into choreography. Then came the pivot that rattled the marble bones of the Capitol. Elagabalus raised his god above Jupiter. The thunderbolt yielded to the sun's flaming chariot. The high shrine of Rome was commanded to host a guest it had not invited. Each day, drums and flutes poured through the streets in spirals of sound, veiled priests danced, and the emperor himself, radiant and remote, bore the sacred stone in a golden chariot. Was this revelation or defiance? To traditional Romans, it felt like waking to find the household gods packed into crates and a stranger asleep beside the hearth. Yet for a moment, awe did its quiet work. Spectacle, after all, is an opiate of great cities. Children laughed at the music, merchants counted silver from crowds, even cynics admitted the ceremonies were curiously beautiful. But devotion that demands primacy rarely stops at beauty. As the boy emperor reshaped calendar and altar, Rome sensed the old protections slipping, like armor unbuckled before the battle has truly begun. The city that had conquered the world now felt itself being conquered by its own emperor's god. Religion in Rome was more than belief. It was law, custom, and the invisible thread binding the empire together. To disturb it was to risk unweaving the fabric of society itself. Yet Elagabalus, still more priest than emperor, demanded not compromise but surrender. The sun god of Emesa was raised above all rivals. Jupiter, long the thunderous guardian of Rome, was compelled to bow. Priests of old cults were stripped of rank, and altars that had stood for centuries were overshadowed by the dark stone from Syria. The empire trembled as flutes shrieked and cymbals clashed through the night air, turning streets into avenues of foreign ritual. The ceremonies were unlike anything Rome had seen. Gilded chariots, veiled dancers, ecstatic chants that blurred the line between worship and frenzy. Some watched in fascination, whispering that the sun's power might renew a weary empire. Others recoiled in silence, believing the gods of their fathers had been insulted. Each parade, each sacrifice, carried an unspoken question. Could Rome's greatness survive if its divine patrons were displaced? Or had the city already yielded its soul to a god no one in the Senate ever named in their prayers? But scandal was not confined to temples. The emperor's private life spilled into the streets like spilled incense, impossible to ignore. He divorced his wife, Julia Paula, without hesitation, and took a bride whose very role embodied the sanctity of Rome, Aquilia Severa, a Vestal virgin. To touch a Vestal was to shatter the sacred covenant that promised the city's survival. Yet Elagabalus did more than touch. He married her, parading the union as though it were divine will. Horror spread. Could Rome endure when its holy guardians were torn from their vows and bound to a boy in jeweled robes? And still the boundaries collapsed further. Elagabalus appeared in public painted, perfumed, and dressed in silks cut for women, not men. He called himself lady, demanded to be addressed as mistress, and surrounded himself with lovers who mocked the rigid hierarchies of Roman virtue. Some claimed he sought surgeons who might reshape his body to match the soul he declared. Was this madness, rebellion, or simply a desperate quest to be seen for who he truly was? History, written by enemies, painted him as a monster. Yet beneath the gossip and venom, one can hear the lonely cry of a youth forced to rule before he had even understood himself. To Romans, it was not just eccentricity, it was sacrilege, an assault on the unwritten laws that held the world together. In every whispered joke, in every senator's clenched jaw, one question burned. Was their emperor a prophet of a new order, or a child dismantling the empire in pursuit of his own reflection? The empire cannot be governed by incense alone. While the boy emperor poured gold into temples, processions, and extravagant feasts, the frontiers bled. Legions in distant provinces fought wars without sufficient pay or supplies. Governors pleaded for reinforcements that never came. Instead, the treasury emptied into festivals where exotic animals were sacrificed and courtyards glittered with silk. Rome had always been a city of spectacle, but now the spectacle replaced governance itself. Behind the veil of incense, order withered. Senators grumbled in their marble halls, their authority reduced to shadows cast by flickering lamps. Generals, hardened by decades on the Rhine and Danube, spat when the emperor's name was mentioned. Even the Praetorian Guard, those who had lifted Elagabalus to the throne, grew weary. To them, loyalty was measured in gold, and though the emperor's gifts were lavish, gifts alone could not erase dishonor. Rome was not being defended, it was being humiliated. At the heart of this unease stood Julia Marina, the grandmother who had once engineered her grandson's ascent. She watched as devotion turned to resentment, as senators whispered not prayers but curses. And she plotted, for she understood what her grandson never could. An emperor must be more than divine, he must be tolerable. She turned her eyes to another boy, Alexander Severus, pliant, calm, and untainted by scandal. Where Elagabalus unsettled, Alexander soothed. Where Elagabalus imposed, Alexander promised obedience. The circle of betrayal drew tight. Officers who once chanted hymns to the Black Stone now pledged in secret to Alexander. Each new decree from Elagabalus, each affront to Roman tradition, hastened their resolve. He demanded loyalty, but loyalty was already being bartered in dark corridors. The more he grasped for control, the more it slipped away like sand through trembling fingers. And so the stage was set. Within the walls of the Praetorian camp, where soldiers lounged with unease and swords never lay far from hand, the name of Alexander was whispered with growing reverence. Elagabalus, radiant in silk and crowned with the title of priest, sensed the tide turning. But power, once it begins to rot, collapses faster than stones struck by lightning. The grandmother who had once crowned him now held the knife of succession. The emperor of the sun stood beneath a darkening sky. The year was 222, and the Praetorian Guard, once his shield, had become his cage. Elagabalus sensed the whispers, but believed the gods would preserve him. He arrived at the Praetorian camp with his mother, Julia Soaemius, hoping to silence rumors and demand loyalty. Instead, the soldiers met him not with cheers, but with cold, sharpened stares. Steel flashed. The sacred emperor, draped in silks, was dragged through the dust like a criminal. His cries, drowned by the roar of men once sworn to protect him, echoed against the stone walls. Beside him, his mother clutched him tightly until blades tore them apart. Their bodies did not receive the honor of emperors. Stripped and mutilated, Elagabalus was mocked by those who had once called him lord. His corpse was dragged through the streets of Rome, jeered at by crowds both fearful and relieved. Finally, as if to erase him from the world entirely, his body was hurled into the murky waters of the Tiber. The boy who had raised the sun god above Jupiter sank beneath the river's surface, swallowed by the city he had tried to transform. His reign had lasted barely 4 years, yet the scars it left on Rome felt eternal. But memory is not so easily drowned. Rome sought to erase him, declaring a damnatio memoria, condemning his name and images to oblivion. Temples were cleansed, the Black Stone sent back to Syria, and Alexander Severus was raised as the new promise of stability. Yet the more fiercely Rome tried to forget, the more Elagabalus lingered, in whispered tales of scandal, in histories written with venom, in the nightmares of senators who had once bowed to him. Was he truly the monster described by ancient pens, or a boy crushed beneath the weight of expectation, vilified for his difference in an empire that demanded conformity? History offers no easy absolution. Perhaps he was both, a reckless tyrant and a tragic youth, a destroyer and a dreamer, a child who dared to rule as a god. What is certain is this: Elagabalus remains a reminder that power without balance breeds not glory, but ruin. His story is not merely one of excess and scandal, but a cautionary tale etched into the very memory of Rome. And in that memory, though cursed, he endures.